Now, it's a well-known fact that the country faces an unemployment crisis. Now, One South Africa Movement chief activist Mmusi Maimane has handed a memorandum of demand to Johannesburg Mayor Mpho Phalatse. He wants details of what the city intends spending on creating new jobs. The memorandum will be given to mayors in 7 other metro municipalities. Maimane joins me to unpack just this. Good morning, Mr. Maimane, and thank you very much for your time.
No, thank you, and thank you so much for having me.
You know, when we speak of local economic development, we have read often that local economic development as well as efficient service delivery somehow broaden economic participation or even lead to a decrease in the unemployment trends. But somehow municipalities have failed to do this, but this time around it seems you're demanding that they fulfill this role. Talk to me about your memorandum.
Yeah, it's a very crucial thing because when it's said and done, a city is the one that makes sure that the lights are on, the water is running, and the streets are tarred. And that's essential if anyone wants to run a business. Secondly, I think that all of these cities, particularly metros, have got massive budgets. Joburg, on average, is at about 60 billion rands. It procures services from the community at large. And therefore, the question is, how is that helping stimulate economic development? Lastly, I think that the unemployment crisis manifests itself in the majority in metros. So if we think about how many people are unemployed in this country, in truth, you know, if you were to line up the unemployed in this country from Cape Town and you just put them 6 feet apart, they would end up in Cairo. So let's understand the nature of the crisis that we face. So when you think about communities like Diepsloot, when you think about them at the forefront of the question, is the fact that our citizens don't work, and cities should be at the forefront of economic development.
Do you think, though, there's an appreciation by some that issues around poor service delivery go beyond just household level?
Yeah.
If it somehow impacts the investment climate, if there's no provision of infrastructure and there's no decent basic services, that now impacts that investment climate. I mean, then after that, it's a ripple effect. You've got an erosion of the local tax base. And then after that, you've got people that are dependent on the municipality too much, and so forth.
Undeniably. So let's take a very simple example. You want to run a bakery in South Africa, in Johannesburg. Your great difficulty is that whilst you are baking and there's load shedding, you can literally throw away all that dough. That's profit for the day. That's a job lost. If you're trying to start a business and you're trying to connect electricity or get an electricity bill, efficiencies around rates, etc., if those things do not work, that business is not going to work. But also, furthermore, it's the punitive measures that cities take against what we so deemed informal trade in this country. So people who run markets, who run agricultural farms, we just start to arrest all of those people and make their conditions unbearable. Those are people trying to make a living. So at the end of the day, we've got to see South Africa as we have it rather than as we wish to have it. And furthermore, we need to ask metros to say, you can't prioritize anything else, but everything you do must respond to the question, how does this create a job?
But then somebody else could then say, you know what, you can make these demands on municipalities, but they don't operate or stimulate the economy in isolation. If basics such as lights, we do not have consistent or reliable supply of energy in this country, then you can scream until you're blue. That the municipality will say, we don't operate in isolation. What has become of Eskom? And how much do you expect us, or what environment do you expect us to create for investment if there is no electricity that is provided consistently?
Part of it is an economic vision I hold about decentralizing economic activity closer to cities. And part of that is about making sure that energy is controlled fundamentally among cities. Services are done so. But I think also we can't let cities off the hook by simply saying we're hamstrung by national regulation. Because to my earlier point, cities procure lots of goods. They procure services. Why should people who are fixing potholes or people who are doing the actual work be procured from elsewhere? These are economic development issues that must take place closer to home so that those businesses can thrive. So if a child in Soweto wants to start a fashion house, the city is central to them before they have to procure funding. The last thing I want to say is, having run business, you must understand that capital and capital flow in stimulating business is fundamental. And what you find often is that for micro entrepreneurs in cities, they don't often have capital that they can use to not only scale up their businesses but to improve them further. And the cities can be at the forefront of creating that registry, funneling capital into those companies and being able to ultimately procure services from them. If you run a plumbing house, let the city invest into your plumbing business and also be able to use you in fixing some of the infrastructural issues. That is local economic development in its long-term plan.
And then the infamous term urbanization. Yeah. Every time we have city officials come to visit us and we try to engage on the issues within a metro, we always hear of some of these issues can be attributed to urbanization. Is it still a legitimate reason, given that this phenomena has been with us for so long? I mean, if you read Dr. Hossein Seramagopa's thesis, he talks about a city. He has gone on to perfectly characterize the issues, be it misalignment in the planning cycle, be it poor execution, but yet still it seems to be an excuse to this day.
Well, I think before, urbanization is a natural process. It happens globally. It is going to happen.
Yes.
What you've got to deal with is that we failed rural economic development. And by that, here's the challenge. If we don't go to what developments that are taking place like cities in rural communities to make sure that you don't have this accelerated net in-migration into cities, that rather, in more than anything, why can't people work, live and play where they can?
In the rural
so that the collapse of the rural economy has had profound consequences on what happens in urban cities because you've got this net in-migration, you've got no housing facilities, you don't have bulk infrastructure for it. Let's procure factories that we can put back into rural communities. Let's stimulate agriculture so that our people who live in rural communities have the dignity of knowing that they can walk to work, do the things they need to do. And that's why part of the focus here is that as we spread the metros, a metro like Tshwane, which has to deal with where Hammanskraal is, it's crucial that there's economic development that takes place in Hammanskraal.
Otherwise, they're coming to Tshwane, they're coming to the city.
You end up with people congregating among cities where ultimately it is unmanaged urbanization. Urbanization is going to happen globally. But what we've got to do is make sure that we do not fail citizens in rural communities and metros even like Polokwane and eThekwini, etc. And Kabeja. We have to be strong at their economic development. Otherwise, South Africa is not going to sustain itself economically. And metros like Joburg and Cape Town are going to always be facing these challenges of poor delivery of services because they can't cope within it.
So you wanted them to take you through the line items. When do you expect this to be done by, particularly in Mpho Phalatse?
We have given them 7 days to do so. And certainly by next week, Thursday, I'll write formally to the city to demand responses to these issues. Because I think that it's important that what we do after that is to monitor that those budgets are actually being used for the job of economic development. Because you can say, I've allocated 10 billion rands to economic development, but what does that mean? Does it mean that you're just throwing money out? We want to make sure it's stimulating economic development, it's helping young people get jobs, and it's ensuring that ultimately there's investment into the right business sector so that more and more jobs must be created. South Africa's only question must be, how do we create jobs? That's the only debate.
So I take it this is a precursor then to an even broader conversation, that you want them to tell you how much they're willing to spend on some of these, and then beyond that, are you looking to then assist, because they might not be of the same persuasion, that you need to also tackle rural economic development to sort of somehow stave off this issue where we're seeing migration into the city. So are you going to have that engagement beyond them saying, this is the amount we've allocated? But where's the vision?
This must be the long-term objective of South Africa, because broadly speaking, if you think about an economy like the UK, you speak about London as the financial hub. And you speak about key cities all over the world that become economic development centers. So we must think hard about what we're doing in Polokwane. What are we doing in Mbombela? What are we doing around all of these metros so that we can broaden out economic development stemming from there? It's no use declaring something a metro and then failing the economic vision of decentralizing, making sure there's democratization, which is the inclusion of more people to participate into the economy. So this is a long-term journey, because I argue this simple case. If you are running a business in Mbombela, how do you get a hold of national funding? How do you get a hold of all of these national greening funds, etc.? You don't. You effectively need to be able to be at your local municipality, at your city, being able to be guided, coached, so that we can transform the economy and make sure more citizens can participate. That is my sole objective that we want to get across the country if we're going to fight off unemployment.
Quite impressive. Mr. Maimane, thank you very much for your time this morning on News Link. That's One South Africa Movement Chief Activist Mmusi Maimane.